Hello, my name is Aubrey Gonzalez. I am president of QP Local 2316. I am also a CAS representative on the Social Service Workers Coordinating Committee. I'm here today to tell you about the new report on CAS workers' health and safety. This report comes from a union employer government working group negotiated during the provincial discussion table in 2011. The Ministry of Child and Youth Services paid for this research. The report was released in September 2014. It was based on over 5,800 surveys by CAS workers and 34 by CAS organizations. So a huge number of QP members participated in the survey. The study looked at violence, which includes physical assaults, attempted assaults, threats, and verbal and written abuse. The study also looked at secondary or witness trauma, where a worker may be harmed by an incident which does not directly affect them, like the death of a child or the injury of a coworker. The report highlighted that child protection workers experience very high levels of violence, exceeded only by police, probation officers, and workers in some health subsectors. This report is so important for us because it validates our experiences of violence and threats while doing our jobs. It gives us statistics and numbers, and this is what employers and governments listen to. It gives us the basis on which to push for added health and safety protection. The results of the report are staggering. Almost three-quarters, 75% of CAS workers reported that they had experienced violence during their careers. Over a quarter, 26.8%, had experienced assaults or attempted assaults. Just under half, 45.2%, had experienced threats or stalking, and almost three-quarters, 67.9%, had experienced verbal or written abuse. Approximately one-third, 32%, of child protection workers reported that they had experienced violence, as in assaults, attempted assaults, threats, stalking, and verbal or written abuse while working alone. Altogether, 56.3% of CAS employees reported that they had experienced multiple types of client violence while working at the Children's Aid Societies. It's interesting to note that CAS reporting systems recorded far fewer incidences of violence than were reported by workers in the survey. This is a huge problem. We need to develop a culture where every incident of violence in our workplace is reported and addressed. Just take a look at this quote. Maybe you felt the same way before. As a worker, I feel dehumanized. I often drive home and check to make sure I am not followed. I do not use my married name professionally or on government-issued documents, as police will use names and personal addresses on police reports, which are open to the public. I have had an unlisted phone number. My cell phone is blocked. Client violence was reported by staff in all occupational groups at the Children's Aid Societies, from support staff to senior managers. However, reports of client violence, particularly recent violence, were highest among child protection staff. Of these, 88.7% reported experiencing some type of client violence. Now looking at rates of violence for 2013, 23.8% of CAS employees experienced at least one type of client violence while on the job. 3.7% had experienced assaults. 8.7% had experienced threats or stalking. 11.8% had experienced verbal and or written abuse. 9.7% had experienced secondary trauma. As well, 7.9% were subjected to multiple incidences of different types of violence. The research also looked into the who, where, and when of assaults. Who committed the assaults? Nearly 60% of assaults were committed by a parent or other family member, and nearly 30% by a child or youth. Where did the assaults take place? Assaults typically occurred in the client's home, 50% of all assaults, while over 20% of assaults were reported as having taken place in the CAS office. When did the assaults occur? In nearly 35% of instances, workers were alone when assaults took place, while in 25% they were accompanied by another caseworker. Nearly 30% of assaults took place during a routine home visit, and nearly 20% during a planned visit to take a child into care. The research showed very uneven protection measures for workers across the province. Some agencies provided higher levels of protection, and others lower levels. There was a low rate of investigations of instances of violence, low rates of worker training, and a lack of common safety policies and standards. In fact, some CASs were not even in compliance with the Ontario's occupational health and safety legislation. The reality is, these rates of violence affect our ability to do our jobs, keeping children and families safe. Altogether, 11.6% of workers who experienced violence reported that afterwards, they were more hesitant about performing their child protection duties. So we, as workers, our employers, and the government needs to understand the current situation and what needs to change. "46 recommendations were identified in the report to protect CAS workers across the province. Some will need to be implemented at the local level, while others involve the province. Some of the key recommendations are: there should be a clear and system-wide public commitment on the part of the ministry to the principle that violence, verbal abuse, and threats to CAS workers are unacceptable. This should be reaffirmed by all authorities, including other responsible ministries, CAS agencies, and the police. Some recommendations aim at developing a culture of safety at CASs. They recommend steps to clearly spell out supervisor responsibilities in the Ontario Health and Safety legislation and anti-violence programs, as well as their performance requirements. Ensure the involvement of workers and the Joint Health and Safety Committees in program development, and ensure that buy-in is sought from all stakeholders with worker input at every point. Establish a template for an anti-violence policy and program at the provincial level to guide CASs in their developing their own policies and programs. They also recommend changes to risk assessment and reporting, including a system-wide and CAS-specific risk assessment method/protocol be developed, including analysis of reported incidences. The client intake process be reviewed in consultation with intake workers and other staff to ensure it is effective in identifying clients who may pose higher risk. A central database should document all incidences, including near misses, with linkages to case files in order to flag clients who pose a risk of violence. They made recommendations on physical environment and technology, as well including a shared services program for acquiring protective technology. This would provide sign-in, sign-out, locating CAS workers, and a means for workers to signal an alarm. The report also recommends changes to work practices, including a big one for us, co-teaming. The report recommends that consistent criteria should be established across CAS systems in consultation with worker representatives for co-teaming or police accompaniment during field visits or transportation of clients, with the aim of achieving best practices for worker protection. Co-teaming is recommended as a standard practice for known dangerous situations, as well as for situations where danger is completely unknown, except where police accompaniment has been confirmed. They also recommend that all assaults and threats of violence should be reported to the police, and that policies and procedures should be established for the protection of workers from online harassment, bullying, and stalking. In terms of psychological support, they recommended anonymous peer support programs be put in place in all CASs. The report recommends all CASs have programs to address post-traumatic stress, secondary trauma, and resilience building, and that a mechanism be created to allow workers to seek support outside the CAS if needed. The report also addresses gaps in training. It recommends that all CAS employees should be trained on all aspects of safety and violence programs with advanced training for frontline staff. Priority topics for skill development include understanding and managing aggressive and violent behavior, resilience training, self-protection, and diffusing and de-escalating violence. Another important topic for training is safe driving techniques for workers who drive long distances, especially in poor weather. They recommend that child protection workers be trained in how to protect themselves online from cyberstalking and harassment, and that the Joint Health and Safety Committee members be trained in how to fulfill their committee responsibilities. These are just a few of the 46 recommendations that arose from this report. There were additional recommendations on shared service opportunities and CAS cooperation, as well as research direction and implementation. Now, you may ask, what can you do about this report? Well, first, I would encourage all to read the report. These are our words and our opinions. It's important that we all understand the risks and hazards we face as well as the potential solutions. Meet with your employer about the report. Start to discuss how the recommendations will be implemented. We will also be putting forward contract language about this report during collective bargaining to begin implementing the recommendations. Many recommendations will require money and adequate staffing, such as co-teaming. This will require the province to be on side. To get this provincial support, I encourage you all to meet with your member of provincial parliament about the health and safety report and about the recommendations arising from recent inquests into child deaths. It's important that we are pushing the province for our own safety while at work, but also we need adequate resources and systems in place to protect children and provide services to families in need. Really, the report is just the first part of this struggle. We now have independent confirmation of what child protection workers have been saying for decades. We are subject to high rates of violence. Now we need to ensure these recommendations in this report are implemented. Thank you so much.